All right. How's everybody doing?
Doing good.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Welcome to the, first live Q&A of how to run a Rumble. We're hosting a Rumble. So what we're going to do is go through some questions, a list of questions we have, and if there are any questions from the attending audience, we can add those in as we go. So just post them into the YouTube chat, and we should be able to grab them and answer them as we go.
We want to introduce ourselves real quick?
Yeah, sure. I'm Matt Lithgow. I am a mentor on Team 2363 Triple Helix, and programming mentor, and been running the Rumble since we started it in 2014.
Great. I'm Nate Lavender. I'm the head coach of Triple Helix 2363, and we glad to be a part of this group that kicked off the Rumble.
I'm Kyle Johnson. I'm a mentor for 1610 Blackwater Robotics. I've been doing FRC since 2004 and got teamed up with these hooligans running Rumble in the Roads as a joint effort between some of the Hampton Roads teams.
Yeah. So the first question is, why did we start the Rumble? So this all started back during the 2014 season. We had talked on Triple Helix for a couple years about, should we host an off-season event? I got word that Nate had been trying to start an off-season event. And I was like, you know what? We have a school that we could host it at. I think the school would be good to host it. So I reached out to Nate. I reached out to Nate, and then we first met at the World Championship that year. Or was it the Virginia Regional? I think it was the championship. And kind of kicked the conversation off there. And we, from there, grouped several people together. An ex-mentor from Triple Helix who works at CNU as a professor. We grabbed Kyle, and we grabbed a couple other team parents and mentors from the area that were interested in being in the original committee. We discussed why we were trying to start off an event. And most of us were very, very interested in that point at doing a switch to districts. The joke was that we were perennially 2 years away in Virginia from switching to districts. So one of the reasons we wanted to do it was to prove that you could run a district event in Virginia high schools, and specifically in our area, because there were no events ever hosted in our area.
And it turned out in 2014, we were 2 years away from hosting districts.
Yeah. So we wanted to prove that we could run a district event, or something the size of a district event. We wanted to bring FRC into our backyard. Hampton Roads isn't a major hub for FRC right now. We have less than 10 teams in Hampton Roads. So we wanted to bring some competition to our area to hopefully grow some of the teams and expand some of the FRC experience in this area. And then not knowing at that point we were 2 years away, but hoping we were, pretty close to switching to districts, we wanted to start growing a volunteer base in Hampton Roads, because having not had an event in the area, that we didn't really have a deep volunteer base, other than the people that were already volunteering for the Virginia Regional. So it was to grow some of that volunteer base, train some people up for when we switched, hopefully, to districts. And then we wanted to provide an off-season event that was as close to an event, like an actual season event, as possible. We didn't want to add a lot of fluff. We wanted it to be about the competition, not necessarily about winning, but, actually getting people a competition experience, bringing new people in. In the off-season, a great time to bring in, freshmen and new people to the team and get them a chance to see what it's like to be at an event. So that was one of the goals of the Rumble. Did you guys have any other things to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that actually in that time, 2014, I think we actually had 14 or 15 teams in Hampton Roads. So we wanted to run this event to kind of prove that it was viable for Hampton Roads as a region to have the ability to independently execute the FRC program. And so, since that time, we've actually decreased to 10 teams, but still now that we have this resource here, we've been able to grow this core of key volunteers in this area and get our local teams to this idea that we should be playing complete seasons that last the whole year. And this has been really influential, the ability to get, really strengthen the level of competition in Hampton Roads.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the need for local volunteers, and that was really a big thing when we got started with Rumble in 2014. Was we wanted to we knew districts were coming, 2 years away constantly, but if districts are coming, we wanted to have that local event run by the local volunteers, just to build that up as we move forward in the future, and that's really been helpful. I think it helped us get an event in Hampton Roads, a district event, and keep it there, to the point now where FIRST Chesapeake was as confident enough in the region to schedule district championship in the region.
Definitely.
Yep. I guess the name of the Rumble in the Roads came from kind of a homage to the Robot Rumble that used to be hosted in Richmond. So we kind of took that, combined it with Hampton Roads, and it became the Robot Rumble in Hampton Roads, and the Rumble in the Roads. And the theme kind of was the Rumble. The original Rumble in the Roads was the whole Battle of the Ironclad. So that's where the theme of the Rumble in the Roads came from. And that's how it got its name.
All right, looks like we got this question. Should you start a new off-season event?
So we get this question, we get asked probably about once or twice a year, can you give us some information about the Rumble on the Road? What is your budget? What's our details about running it? And one of the questions we kind of always respond with is, why do you think you need to run an off season? Is there an actual need in your area for an off season? Are you trying to start an off season right next door to another off season? Because if you are, you're likely going to be pulling teams from that other off season. And you're going to be sharing team loads. Unless you have a lot of teams that are looking to go to a second off season event, you're likely going to be, battling that other off season for those teams.
This is something that we were really concerned with when we started Rumble. The Richmond Robot Rumble didn't really fill to capacity. IROC didn't fill to capacity. Even Bob, which now Bob usually runs a wait list. I think at that time, even Bob wasn't really filling to capacity. So we were really concerned about the risk of drawing away teams from these other events that weren't completely filled yet.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons for several years the Rumble ran a discount for if you signed up for a second off-season event, we gave you a registration discount, was to encourage that, going to multiple events, trying to fill up all of the the off-season events in the region, because we as the event organizers not only want you to come to our off-season, but we want you to go to as many off-seasons as possible, because the more experience you get, the better your team can be, the more you learn, the more fun you have. I mean, you build a robot, you want to get it on that carpet as much time as possible. So the more off seasons you go to, obviously, the more time your robot gets to play, and the more experience the members of your team get. So that, like Nate said, that was one of our concerns was, are we going to have a problem filling up because these other ones are also having a problem filling up?
And a thing we see a lot is teams wanting to host an off season just so they don't have to travel so far to an off season, and that might be a bad way to start. You really have to evaluate whether teams are going to come or not, or you might end up at an event by yourself.
Mm-hmm. The next question is, when are you planning to start this? Are you talking about, hey, can you give us some details and it's over the summer and you're planning to run one in September or October? We found over the years.
Yeah, that might be viable. So the answer to the question of how much time do I need to plan is, I have no idea what the answer to
as much as possible.
It's just as much time as required in order to solve all the unanswered questions.
Yeah, I mean, we typically start kicking off our Rumble planning sometime, actually probably end of March, beginning of April, talking about where we're going to host it and making sure there's dates available at the schools. We found over the years that the earlier you can announce a date, the more teams will sign up, especially if you can get that date announced prior to school letting out.
Yeah,
Because
there's definitely.
we'll see
I sort of watch the registrations every year, and we see a big surge in registrations in late May, and then hardly any movement over the summer because most teams are just totally incommunicado over the summer.
Yep. Yeah, you'll start to get some trickle in towards the middle of August, and then you'll get another big registration in September. And if you're planning to run an event in September, if you're only getting registrations in September, it's going to be pretty stressful. We found if you can announce by the championship, most of your registrations, especially once you've been doing it for a few years, most of your registrations are going to come in before school lets out because teams know they're going to want to go. So they will sign up before school lets out to make sure they can get a spot. So the answer to how much time do you have before this is going to happen is hopefully if you're starting it in the summer, your plan is to do it the next year, not that fall. Just because you want to give teams that chance to sign up. And if they're not, if they don't have time to sign up, it's going to be stressful on you because you're probably not going to fill up your event.
And you've got to schedule around not only events in your area, but events in other areas. If you're looking to attract teams that are going to drive a little bit further away, you've really got to schedule, as well as scheduling your playing field, which I think that question is coming up later.
Mm-hmm. One more part that goes into this question is what happens if your major motivator for running an off-season event is as a fundraiser? What would you say to those teams?
Let's see. The first year, our final budget, I think we came out with plus $40.
That's about right. Yep, we made $40 in our first year.
Yeah. So it was actually pretty stressful that first year, wondering if we were actually going to go over budget because there's always the last minute changes. And there is a question later about what are the biggest surprise problems you're running into. And I will say that first Rumble come about. Let's see, the first Rumble was in October, so I think come about the end of September, I got a big bomb dropped on me that we'll talk about later. That was massively stressful because I didn't think I had any money. But yeah, so it was plus $40 the first year, and then next year we made a little bit more, and the past couple of years we've made quite a bit more. One of the other things, why do you actually want to run an off season? Are you trying to use it as a fundraiser? Are there other specific reasons? We listed off our goals, and having that specific set of goals has helped us year after year when we decide, do we want to make this change or is this beneficial? We always look back at the goals and does it actually meet the goals of why we're running this event? If you notice,
it's the same thing as the robot development process. If we can stop and in the very early planning process, write down what our objectives are in planning this event, then forever after we can always refer back to that as some guide rails to make decisions. Yeah.
If you notice, one of our goals wasn't to make money. We had this was not planned as a fundraiser. And as we said, the first year we didn't make any money on it. So having that set of goals of why you're doing this is great for later when you're talking about, okay, should we do this? And does that meet the goals of why we're doing this event? Anything else to add to should you start an off season? One of the questions is, do you have the budget to, in case you don't make any money or actually lose money on the event the first year, can you cover it? Don't expect to make money, and you should. I think we were lucky to not lose money the first year.
In the first year, also we had a bunch of purchases to make that
right.
An established event. So that first year budget is going to be larger than following years. So if you can get a sponsor to help you out with those first year budgets, and I think we're going to talk about some of those sponsorships and things later as well. But that first year, you're going to not have the equipment that you need unless you can borrow it from a school system or someone else.
So these next questions actually get into how we gain equipment. And the first thing is the biggest chunk of equipment, of course, is our official playing field that lets us play the real FRC game. The way we got our playing field in 2014 is actually different than the way we've gotten it since. We rented our playing field in 2014 from Andy Mark.
Yeah, 14 and 15.
Okay.
We got it from Andy Mark. And since then, we've been able to borrow the First Chesapeake field. First Chesapeake purchased 2 fields beginning in 2016 with the move to districts. So back to Andy Mark, when you rent the field from Andy Mark, they drive it to you in the Andy Mark truck, and they supply the FTA and the Andy Mark staff that is required for them in that contract. For the First Chesapeake field, the requirements are: you still have to have an FTA, preferably a First Chesapeake FTA. And luckily, I am one of those FTAs, but we have others that are typically willing to come down. But that's on the form for First Chesapeake. You have to have a registered FTA available because First doesn't allow nobody else has the password to use electronics. And then you also have to simply schedule it with First Chesapeake now on renting their field. They're very willing to work with anyone to host an event. They want teams to host off seasons. It's to the benefit of everyone, but they're only going to send one field out. So if you don't know, the field ships around to the different district events in pods. And Glenn from First Chesapeake packs up the field into 2 pods, and then those pods get shipped around to everyone using the off-season fields. So Rumble, IROC, Battle of Baltimore, all use the same field and are all on different weekends. And the different off-seasons that are using the field in our district all share the shipping cost.
That's right. That's how the pricing works for getting the playing field from First Chesapeake. So something to note here is that First Chesapeake does not charge any sort of rental fee for the playing field. They provide it totally at cost, which is amazing. What we do have to pay for is the transportation of that field from Richmond and around to all the events. And so that's split up among all the events that require that field. So there's a circuitous route that this field has to follow, and the price that our event pays is one share of the total cost that is incurred by the transporting this field around.
And I believe we also shared the shipping cost of shipping everything back to New Hampshire at the end
right.
of the season.
That's right. Yeah, the FMS and the sort of a certain portion of the game specific elements must return to First headquarters in New Hampshire, and the off-season events cover that portion of the cost too. A lot of stuff does not have to go back to New Hampshire though, and so a lot of the folks who've attended Rumble on the Roads in the past few years have been able to benefit from that as we've distributed the parts of the field that don't need to go back to New Hampshire.
It's always funny seeing previous year's logos from the field on robots as polycarb is used from previous fields.
Yeah, and what gets given away at Rumble is simply the things that aren't going to get reused in the future. So any game specific thing that is not part of the driver station or things like that. Last year we gave away all 4 rockets. We gave away a half of it an assembled cargo ship, and I don't know. But
yeah, I mean we're seeing robots wearing elements of the past games. It's
these
really
teams
awesome
are starting to come in now knowing we do this with a plan of, okay, I'm going to take the cargo ship this year.
And the reason that happens is because we're the last event and First Chesapeake doesn't have the space to store all of that stuff in their warehouse. They could take the metal and things and go recycle them, but it's, give it to the teams and they don't have to deal with it back at the First Chesapeake warehouse. And at the end of our event, since we're the last event for First Chesapeake, we split the field up into 2 pods. We ship all of the field borders and things back to First Chesapeake in that pod, and we set up another pod, and that pod goes straight back to New Hampshire from Rumble, just simply because we are the last event. First headquarters does have a limit on when your off seasons can happen. We had to get approval this past year to have the event the first weekend in November. That is the cutoff weekend. They won't let anyone have events without their approval. So typically, the closer you are to New Hampshire, you may be able to host an event the weekend after, but further away events that are going to take longer to ship back have to be back that first week of November in order for the FRC staff to get all that equipment and renovate it essentially for the next season.
We sort of see that as a risk for our event, not only our event, but also off seasons in general. As FRC grows as a program, FIRST is having to build and deploy more and more fields. And I don't know how many fields are in circulation right now, but it's a lot. And having more fields means that headquarters needs way more time to to receive them back and update them for the next year's game. So this pushes back the deadline for the return of the FMS and the other game-specific elements that are reused. So over time, over many years, the window of time that's available for off seasons to run might start to get shorter and shorter. All right. So how about a question about volunteers? This one, how many volunteers do we need?
So what we did to figure out our volunteer pool is because we weren't in districts at that point, we asked Virginia First, was what they were at that point, what their regional volunteer list looked like. We kind of went through that list and trimmed any of the areas we felt for a smaller event we wouldn't need, for an unofficial event we wouldn't need, and for the size of the event we trimmed down some of the numbers. And we ended up coming out we've run about 60 to 70 volunteers since the first year. I think we might have been a little lower the first year, but since then we've been around 60 to 70.
And so we should clarify and say that for anybody who's not familiar, our event, we run a maximum of 32 teams and 1 day of competition. If we were to change those parameters, we might change the number of volunteers in total. But yeah, we consistently run about 60 or 70 volunteers. And in some areas, this is enough. In some areas, it's too many. In some areas, it's not really enough. So that actually lets us talk about the next question, which is that how do we recruit the key volunteers that lead up these teams of volunteers that put on certain like highly specialized areas of the event?
Well, so I think the answer to that is you make sure you add somebody to the event planning committee that's an FTA. I mean, honestly, having Kyle as an FTA and being one of the people that, for many, many years has volunteered at the Virginia Regional, and since has volunteered, in FIRST Chesapeake district events and everything, having the people that already that are volunteers was a huge help, especially as key volunteers like FTAs and CSAs and all that kind of stuff. If you don't know those people, I think your first step is to get with your local regional planning committee and see who they can help you get, because starting off, if you don't know how to do it, you're going to want somebody that knows how to do it. You're not going to want to go in not knowing how to run the field. Obviously, you're going to have an FTA anyway. But you're going to want some people with that experience initially, especially if you're going to run it for the first year. So getting that, talking to your regional committee, the district, whoever, to help get you in contact with some of those people to see if they can help you along the way, and give you some help that first year while you train up new people to get you started.
And what we really did was used experience from having worked with volunteers in our area previously, whether it be in Richmond or even Maryland. Some people had come up, and we took those people who had been in the assistant positions and trained them into the key positions. So we had, assistant field supervisors or just lead field reset that we trained up into field supervisor. Queuers the same way. They had only been a queuer before. We trained up lead queuers. We trained up judge assistants. Yep. So we've used Rumble to really help, and we have pretty much key volunteers in nearly every area I think we're missing a head referee locally, and other than that, we have created our own crew, and that's a thing that we also heard from IROC, from Gail. That was one of the things that she said. At least to me, was she wanted to be able to run IROC with her crew. She wanted her team, Allied, to be able to contain key volunteers in every area and not need outside resources, not rely on anyone else. Not that relying on other people is a bad thing, but having those people locally is a big deal. It means you don't have to put people in hotels to run your event, and that's cost savings.
Yeah, IROC was a fantastic example for us, and everything. I feel like everything that we're doing well, we learned from IROC. I mean, this goes back and reflects on our mission, which we established in 2014. We wanted the ability to independently execute the program in Hampton Roads, and so that has led us to try to build people up into the skill sets that we needed here. One thing that we can say is that since this is an off season, we're free to deviate from the requirements that FIRST has for some of the key volunteers. Our judge advisor, for example, like I think the requirement is they have to be like 24 or something ridiculous. And our judge advisor is this fantastic 21-year-old who will eventually become, a key volunteer during the official season. But for now, she's heading up our ability to run FRC in our region, at least in the off season. Another thing to say about how do we recruit volunteers is we help out with lodging. Even though we don't we don't do hotel rooms, we definitely put people up on sofas and on floors if we need to, and whatever it takes to get people here.
Yep.
Okay, so anything else to say on that one?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the main point is after that first year, if you can start getting people in and training them in that first year, probably a good 5 to 10 of our positions that we fill every year are typically shadow positions. We have somebody shadowing the head ref. We have somebody shadowing an FTA. We have somebody shadowing the field supervisor. Even if we have those key positions already locally, we need backups. I mean, sometimes people move and, a field supervisor moves, as an example.
I wonder
actually, and a judge advisor moves. I just realized that.
Yep.
So you're going to have backups to those positions, and you're going to want people to have breaks. And some of these people run events 6 times a year, and maybe they just don't want to do an off season that year. You can't fault them for that. So if you're stuck relying on one person, you're going to find yourself into a bad situation, because sometimes those people just can't make it. There's a wedding and the person can't make it that year. So having those people and shadowing and constantly training new people is hugely advantageous to do. So just always be training new people.
Takes a long vision, and not just about the single year, but about the whole the whole program.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. How about kind of related? How do we recruit teams to our event?
Don't be afraid to just put yourself out there and just talk about it. I actually made the comment when we were setting this all up that this is actually odd for us to only have one Rumble logo in view, because basically we put Rumble logos on everything to make sure you know what it is. That first year we walked around handing out stickers at events saying, hey, we'd love you to come to our off-season event this year, and stuff like that. We've built up over the years a contact list that we spam shamelessly with event information, whenever we set the date, when registration opens up, all that kind of stuff. Setting the date early, as I said, is key, especially if you can get it set before school lets out, because then teams will want to register at that time. Asking your local and surrounding regions to advertise for you. We're in very Southern Virginia for this event, so it makes sense to advertise to some North Carolina teams because it's actually closer for them than some of the other North Carolina events. So we've asked the North Carolina committee to send out emails for us, letting people know that registration's open. guerrilla marketing, as Nate has listed here. It just constant, feedback, constantly putting it in people's faces. It gets much, much easier after you've been doing it for several years, because teams already know. Teams are expecting that email to come out, sometime around the championship to say, hey, we've set our date and registration's open. So that gets much easier. You get, I think we have 6 teams that have been to every single Rumble. And on top of that, we have probably 4 or 5 more that have only ever missed one. So it gets easier because teams constantly just want to come back.
That's right. So for an established event like ours, we recruit teams by leveraging like the quality that we've established and the fact that we're a known entity now. For a new event, I think, before we started our first year in 2014, we had already put in probably a good 2 years of work into building up a really awesome contact list. We lucked out because those were actually the days when contact information for lead mentors was still available on Tim's. A lot of people don't even remember Tim's. So we lucked out in that way too. You go for this question from
Trevor.
From Trevor.
Yeah. How did you guys develop your logo? Well, we've gone through 2 logos.
The first logo was a pothole.
Yeah, well, I made the first logo, and as I said, our theme is, the Battle of the Ironclads, the Battle of Hampton Roads. So it was actually an image of the Monitor and the Merrimack. It's actually a decently famous painting of the Monitor and Merrimack. And I kind of overexposed it and put some colors in and all that kind of stuff, and it was crap. It's on. I think we probably only have a few of those what we call retro shirts left.
They're still for sale.
They are still for sale. So if you're at an event, you could pick one up.
Definitely.
Vintage.
Vintage. There we go.
So then after that logo, we, after 1 year of letting that logo run free, I developed another version. But I think it's something to say here is that we kind of had like an iterative approach to this. We realized in our first year that, hey, we weren't really going to be able to complete everything we wanted to do. And so the logo was actually really not a priority in our first year. And then at the start of year 2, then we realized, hey, it's time to try to develop a real brand that we could then go out and do guerrilla marketing with. Yeah.
So as you can see,
yeah, it's the process. It's graphic developed in SVG format in vector editing software. If you can play around with whatever Bezier curves or whatever they are, then you can develop whatever logo you want. And then the thing that makes a logo work is not necessarily anything to do with quality. All it has to do with is how many times you put it in front of people's eyes. If you can just make it a thing that people see all the time, then it's a great logo.
Yeah, I keep threatening to Glenn that we're going to stick Rumble stickers all over the field every time we return it.
Exactly.
Yep. And as you can see, the current logo still has, the feel of the, not as much, but it's still got, the anchor and the cannon, the Civil War cannon. And then those are, factory smokestacks, but they were supposed to kind of be, the smokestacks off of an ironclad.
Right.
And then a gear, it's a robotics event. So, yeah, that's the history of the logo, where it came from and why it started off crap and became much, much better.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So that second year, we obviously spent a lot more time on branding. We actually have a branding guide with, what the actual colors are, how it's supposed to be displayed, what size, when you're supposed to use what. So we spent a lot of time that next year on, how can we actually make the brand better? And Nate making a good logo was actually, the first big step in that.
All right, this question's for Kyle. How do we determine match cycle time?
It's all magic, really.
It is. Yeah, I
It's
believe
what
that.
it is. It's a magical calculation that is sent to the FTAs from FIRST headquarters. That's what we start with. So before even week 1 happens, headquarters gives the FTAs cycle time. They haven't played any matches yet, but they know how long it's going to take to reset the field.
Awesome.
Okay. So that's how it starts off. So we use knowledge from normal from event times, and your week 1, week 2 events that take longer cycle times as teams get used to the fields, and your week 3, 4 events and district championship even the cycle times speed up a little bit. So that's how we kind of start. But I guess 2 or 3 years ago, headquarters built in a really cool feature into FMS that allows you to alter match cycle times. So it used to be that you set a cycle time and it was the same schedule for the entire event. You couldn't change it. So that's why your events would get really behind on the first day of competition, because you couldn't make up for that time you were losing on long cycle times. So now you can extend those cycle times. So say this year, I think the cycle time given to us was 7 or 8 minutes. We can set the first round of matches to 10 minutes, 10-minute cycles, then the next round to 9-minute, then the next round to 8, and then if the cycle time is 7, then we do 7-minute cycles. So that's really how that's determined, and part of that really it plays in on how many teams are at the event as well. If you have, and we have to stay within schedule. So if we can do 32 teams at 8-minute cycles, that's what we'll go for. But we've got to stay within schedule. So if it's great to do 10-minute cycles at the beginning, but if it doesn't fit the schedule, we can't do it. So that's kind of it. It's really dependent upon the speed of the teams. Hopefully at an off season, you've got some experienced teams, but you also have a lot of rookies and teams being trained, brand new drive teams that don't know what to do on the field. So we try to give them a little more time, but 8 minutes is probably about right. But yeah, it's just a guess, really. It's just a really big guess on what can we stick to not get behind, because nobody wants to be behind. Nobody wants to stay at an event.
You say that, but we tend to be, every event tends to be behind schedule all the time. Hey, so at an event like the one we ran last year with 32 teams, how many matches did teams get?
I think we ran 6 matches per team.
Something I think that's 5 or 6.
I think it's 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And that is a cool thing. If anybody's looking to run match schedules or things, or even do some data analytics, Idle Loop software makes the matchmaker algorithm. And if you know where to find it, it's on their website, but you just have to know what to search for. It's kind of hard to find if you don't know the name of it, but it's Idle Loop software. You can actually go out, and that's how we pre-make schedules for Rumble occasionally. You can go out and grab that, and you can run match schedules. You put a list of team numbers in a text document. You tell it where the document is. Say, hey, how many matches do I want per team? You run the algorithm, and it makes a schedule for you. So that's kind of what we do. We try to import that. FMS does have ability to import schedules in a tab delimited format. I don't know who uses tabs, but it's kind of weird. But we've done that a couple of times before as well. We didn't do it this past year because we wanted FMS sync. You can't sync to headquarters for data without if you do a custom schedule. So we just let FMS run Matchmaker. But if you want to play with that, that's pretty neat on determining how many matches. If you don't know how to do the math properly on 6 matches or number of matches divided by 6 teams, it'll do it for you. And it'll even make surrogates. It'll place the surrogates in for you. And surrogates are supposed to go into the 3rd round, if you didn't know that.
Yeah, it was 6 matches. I checked. One of the questions, the comments we always get every year is, are there going to be practice matches? And we'd like to run practice matches. And if you run practice matches, obviously that cuts back of how many actual matches you can actually run. So we've always viewed it as you had an entire season of practice. So we're not running practice matches. We're going straight into it because we want to try to get it, like we said, it's one of our goals is get it as close to an actual competition as possible. So the more matches we can get, the closer it is to an actual event. So we get 6 matches, which almost original.
Yep, that's right. Whenever somebody asks me this question, my answer is always the entire event is practice.
Yeah.
Right.
And not just for teams, it's practice for volunteers, it's,
Yep.
you know, for show runners, for everybody.
Yep.
All right, that's enough for that. How about let's go back to the questions about equipment. What do we typically need from the facility itself that we're running the event from?
So now that we've done this at 2 different venues, you always need a gym, obviously. When you're looking at the gym, are you going to pull out both sides of the bleachers? Are you going to pull out one? Are there even bleachers to pull out? If you're at, Churchland, they're permanent bleachers. So you wouldn't even have to do that. But how many people are you needing to sit? And then that will also lead into the locations for pits. If you're going to only pull out one side of the bleachers, that may leave you some room for pits in the gym. If you need to pull both sides of the bleachers out, then you may have to put your pits somewhere else. We've done that in an auxiliary gym. Some schools have auxiliary gyms, some do not. We've also done cafeterias. If the cafeteria is decently close to the gym, you can use the cafeterias for pits also. You don't necessarily always have the height that you want out of a cafeteria. We're lucky at Menchville that our cafeteria ceilings were very tall, so we didn't have to worry about that. IROC's cafeteria ceilings, at least in the one cafeteria, are short, so they do have to worry about that.
We've run this event 6 times now, and I think we've run it in about 4 different configurations.
Yeah. I don't think we ran it at Menchville in the same configuration the same year, or
Right.
in two consecutive years.
Yep.
Where you're going to put the field, where you're going to put the pits is the big thing. On top of that, in the gyms, schools are very protective of their gym floors. Obviously, it's expensive to recover a floor. Do they have a floor covering you can use, or are you going to have to rent one or purchase one? Some of the school, Menchville and Heritage both have tarps to cover just the basketball court, but nothing else. So we had to purchase some tarps and use those as floor covering for everything else.
Right. But you'll think about like what kind of protection is the tarp really giving you?
Right.
If you drop a hammer while you're working on the robot, that is going to just permanently dent that expensive wooden gym floor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we have to think about whether the school is going to be comfortable with that kind of covering.
Right.
If we look at events like IROC, these guys have invested in hardwood or whatever it is,
Hardboard
panels. Yeah, masonite panels to cover all the pit area and the high traffic areas near the field.
Mm-hmm. We had actually
ships masonite inside the pods for us to use under the field, but only enough to go under the playing field.
Right. We had actually looked at in that first year borrowing a floor protection from another local private school because they actually had almost happened. They decided to pull out last second, but I guess it wasn't too last second. But they had a several $1,000 worth floor covering that we almost borrowed, but it ended up working out that the tarps worked for us, especially at Menchville. Where we pull out both sides of the bleachers, and the only thing in the main gym is the competition field. So that's already protected by the hardboard, and they weren't as protective of the auxiliary gym as they were of the main basketball court. The pits at Heritage have been in the main gym, and they haven't been overly, concerned with it. We put the main field over the main basketball court. Since we don't pull out one side of the bleachers, that's where the pits go. And I think they're less concerned about the side courts than they are of the main court. Something else, you need tables. What are you going to put in the pits for teams? Some teams have their own stuff anyway, but you need to cover it just in case. So we've been lucky that we can get tables from the school system at no cost. Delivered from their warehouse. So we'll schedule that to get delivered and to the school. A lot of times, if that's going to be a possibility, you can just you get in contact with the activity director at your school, and they can usually put you in contact or get the order in for you for those tables. We usually go around 40 tables for those 32 teams. It gives us enough for field tables, teams, registration tables. If we end up running an expo that year. Previous years we didn't do it this last year. We'll usually throw some additional tables into that order to cover the expo too. But around 40 tables has been good enough to cover us, especially since some teams will come in with, something already and they'll remove the table from their pit. So you usually won't have to use all 32 on teams. And then the big thing is the security and custodial services. And that's a decently big cost to the event. You'll want to figure out with the school how many security guards they're comfortable with and how many custodial staff they're comfortable with having at the event. And then you'll typically have to pay for those services, pay the fees of what those security guards and custodial staff are going to get paid while at your event.
It could be the case that your venue may need you to have off-duty police officer or an EMT on site as well, and we're lucky that we haven't needed that resource, at our events yet. One small thing that is easily overlooked that we require from the host facility is for every set of double doors, we usually need them to take out the center divider. So that's a big deal. Those don't come out very often. Sometimes they're when you start taking them apart, they'll break. That's a big deal that easily gets overlooked.
On top of the gym, you need to schedule when you're actually going to have access to the gym for setup day. These fields can take 5, 6, 8 hours, depending on the season, to set up. So the earlier you can get access to that field or the gym, the better. We try to shoot for 2:00 on that Friday so we can get started right out after school lets out. Some years that hasn't happened, which has really caused problems. This last year, we actually got lucky that the field was able to get set up so quickly because we didn't get the gym until like 4:00. And then they actually wanted us out of the school by 10:00. So we had to get everything done for the most part by that time and then finish anything extra up in the morning. But getting it as early as possible and getting that expectation set early to, hey, we need this at 2:00. Otherwise, we're going to have problems getting it up and running in time.
So what's success look like for, if we were able to complete what we needed to complete Friday night? What would the event look like at that time?
We've typically gotten, like, at minimum, we've gotten electronics tested, and then anything else that needed configured the next morning. Some years we have not had that success and have finished setting it up Saturday morning. But typically I think that would be the definition of success, is if we can get the electronics tested before we leave the gym on Friday night, that we're probably in a good place.
Yeah, from the field side, just having everything, knowing that everything works. Whether, if there's sensors that need to be calibrated or something, we're going to do that again Saturday morning anyway. So just knowing that the sensors are operational, and then typically Saturday morning we just come in early, do that calibration and finish putting down tape lines, which is probably about a full hour worth of work. But that's easy to do in the morning. So having hardware together, and knowing that all the electronics work, and we're good to go the night before.
One question that we didn't prepare in advance, but how many people is too many people for Friday night setup?
Depends on if those people know what they're doing or not.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely. I think I would answer this by saying that, like, it's as many people as we can successfully supervise to do the correct amount of work. Right. And do it correctly.
Experienced volunteers need less supervision.
Right.
And that's, the experienced people that are there that have set up the field before, they know what to do. They know how it's put together, but you'll have, team members that are coming in with robot load in and say, hey, is there anything we can do to help? And we have to say, sorry, no. That's we want to involve those people, but too many people is a problem sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes more people doesn't make it go faster. Sometimes it slows it down.
Right. I think there's a law about that, right? So I think it's about 7:50. Why don't we skip down to this one? What do you guys think that this event does differently that we think is so great that every event should do?
So when we've hosted it at Menchville, Triple Helix's school, we always tried to set up. We have a full wooden practice field, and we always tried to set the full field up at Menchville. We haven't had the room to do it at Heritage lately, but that was one of the goals. But we still, even at Heritage, we roll out some carpet, we set up some field elements, so we have some form of a practice field that teams can use, and it does get utilized. I think when we had the full field up at Menchville, I mean, I don't think there was a time where there wasn't a team on the practice field during the event. So even though the event really is a practice event, teams still want to be able to perform on the field, so they're going to do stuff on the practice field anyway. So having that practice field, it's constantly being utilized, even when we didn't have the full field. I think that's been a big thing,
very unique thing among off-season events. I mean,
yeah.
So like IRI has this capability, and maybe a couple others. This is a really special thing.
Yeah. Yep. And it's been beneficial. It hasn't been wasted time.
One thing that I'm excited about what Rumble does that other events don't necessarily do, we publish a roster of our key volunteers a couple weeks prior to the event. The benefits of this is that it lets people know in advance about who they expect to see there. We sort of consider that FIRST Chesapeake is a business that's based on relationships. And we've certainly benefited from those relationships as we've gone through the process of starting up our event. We reflects on our mission that we set out to build a stronger Hampton Roads. And we did that by identifying the key individuals who are good at what they do, that we look up to them. So we want to be able to share that resources with as many people as we can. These are the people that, if you are a new alumni just starting out in your journey towards becoming a head ref, you could look at this list and be pointed to someone who you should learn from.
One of my favorite things is that we do awards during field timeouts in semifinals and finals. So if we have awards, or we are going to have awards, most events don't do this. A few off seasons do, but strangely, the Israel district events do this as well. And we take a time. The field has to stop for 6 minutes during these timeouts anyway, and give out an award, and that makes the entire event shorter. Which is great for everyone. Everyone can go home. At the end of the event, all the awards are already given out. All we have to do is give out the winner banners, and everybody gets to go home.
Yep. I think teams really benefit from the opportunity to interview for these awards too. We get to leverage the fact that this whole event is practice for the teams and the volunteers. So being able to put students in the position of interviewing with judges who are doing that role for the first time, I think that's a really special thing.
Yep. Banners and trophies. I mean, the winners want to go home with something. One of the mistakes we made the first year was we only had trophies for the winners. And that was one of the comments after the first event was, hey, it would have been nice to have something for the finalists too. And we're like, that makes sense. Finalists get something at the regular events. Might as well give something at ours too. So we give a white banner, not a blue banner, with obviously the big Rumble logo on it, and the year. And then it was nice that our logo that Nate came up with also translated into a really nice looking trophy. So we have our laser cut trophies that go out. One thing that people might not realize is that we at Triple Helix uses these trophies as a practice machine shop activity in the fall. So they're one of the small projects that we set new students onto as we're starting to learn how to use tools and operate in the machine shop. Mm-hmm. Yep.
We have an outright ban on what we call audience participation music, and that's a whole class of songs that where the like, for example, where the singer tells you how to dance to the song. That's something that we would consider audience participation music, and that's not allowed to be played at Rumble.
I will fire you from your volunteer position.
Yep.
Also, we don't do as much pre-match announcing. as you would see at a real event, the MC does not run around and point at every team every single match.
And that was actually something new this year that we wanted to try. We used to do it, with the MC and having a dedicated MC. And actually, if you were to look at our volunteer roster from the event this past season, we didn't have an MC listed because our intent was just to have game announcers and really quickly, list off the list, teams playing. And then if there was some time, talk about some of the teams. But we wanted to try to trim some of that time down and see how it went. And I mean, everyone seemed to think it went pretty successfully. We got comments in the survey about, hey, game announcing was great. I don't know that people necessarily even noticed, which was, in my mind, a success.
The game announcing is kind of more of a product for the remote viewers rather than for the audience that's listening there. So yeah, and we're starting to get more remote viewers, so it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what do you? Should we make this the last question?
Sure.
All right, which one do you want to go with?
Let's go. We'll combine what mistakes has the Rumble made and what were some of the biggest surprises.
All right,
because we've kind of hit on how do we schedule with other events and all that kind of stuff. All right, so some mistakes we've made. We still haven't necessarily, in my mind, nailed down the award ceremony. I like doing it in between matches, but there's still the awkward time of you're giving an award to a team that just played and they're all running off the field. And you're like, hey, no, come back, get your award. And then making sure the team's actually in the stands. There's been times where I'm like, hey, I know this team's getting an award, and I see some people walking down the stands from that team. I'm like, no, hold off for 2 seconds. Don't go anywhere. Trust me. So it's still a little, and there's still just some awkward delays in how to do that. So I don't know that we've necessarily nailed down exactly how to do it yet. Doing it between matches in that downtime is definitely the answer, on how to do it correctly, but we just have to figure out the cadence of how to do it. Right. How we announce that. How do we make sure teams know this is coming? We tried this past year doing it. If a team was just eliminated and we knew they were getting an award, we would go and give it to them. I don't know that I'll necessarily do that in the future because, like I said, the team's running off the field and they're all, bummed they just got eliminated. And we're like, no, hey, come back. We have something for you. So we may just do it randomly in between matches instead of trying to do it, when we know a team has been eliminated. Yeah.
So it requires us to be really tuned in to how the eliminations is going and what's going to happen with the awards in advance. So, it requires us to really watch and turn it into a good show, even though it's totally winged.
Yeah.
Right? One story that I can tell you about a mistake that the Rumbles made in the 2018 event, when we were first setting up the power distribution on Friday evening, we did this really the wrong way. And we ended up sending, twice the voltage to some pits and no voltage to other pits and inverted voltage to some pits too. So we luckily at that time, only 2 teams had loaded in and set up their pits. So we only had, I think, 1 toasted battery charger and a couple other things, but it could have been way worse. So the lesson learned from that is, either the power distribution should be set up by like the rental company, or if we're going to do it ourselves, then we ought to use a multimeter and check that we've done it correctly at every connection. It's only a few connections, so it's not a big deal, but we can't do it wrong.
Surprise problems. I hinted at before a story about, what almost killed me the first year hosting Rumble. Make sure your administrators at the school understand what they're expecting and what the expectation is. We had some hours and numbers set for security guards and custodial, and our principal last second, having just gone to the Virginia Regional and watched us play that spring, all of a sudden had it in his mind that that's what we were doing, and was thinking there was going to be 60-some teams and thousands of people. So he's like, no, we need to bump these numbers up, and basically tripled the costs of custodial and security fees, basically putting me almost $2,000 in the red. At that point, like I said, we only made $40 that first year. So I was panicking, like, we don't have the money for this. Like, I can't pay you that amount of money because I don't have it. I've already paid for everything else. So we had a conversation, we had a talk. There was some drama involved. And finally got him to understand, this is how this is actually going to be. There's only going to be this many people here. There's only going to be this many teams. In that first year, we didn't even have 24 teams. So it was even smaller than we run now. But that one, and this was like 2 weeks before the event this dropped. So that almost killed me. And then, so you think we would have learned our lesson. And then we moved to Heritage and the same thing happened.
Yeah.
So we had to have the same conversation. At least this time it was it happened, I think, like a month and a half before the event, like right at the beginning of the school year, they started to have this conversation. And I was like, no, look, we're going to be very segmented to the school where people aren't going to be going anywhere. We're only going to have this many people. And then I said, and here are the numbers we used to run at the other school. So this is successfully worked with this number of people before. And we've been luckily able to do that for the past couple of years now with those numbers. I was able to talk him down too. But the lesson learned from this is we actually kind of have a rule in place now, that if there is a school interested in hosting the Rumble, before you are eligible to host a Rumble, your administration needs to come to the event the previous year. So if there's a school that's interested in hosting the 2021 Rumble, their administration is going to have to come to the 2020 Rumble so they can see what they're expecting, so they know. Because as everybody in this knows, the first time you go to an event, it's different than what you'd expect. You can't imagine what an event is like. And then if you've been to a 64 team event, I'm sure it's hard to imagine what a 24 team event is going to look like. So that happened twice, almost killed me twice. But we were able to get through it and talk them down. So that was a big one. The other thing we deal with every year are team dropouts. Some years have been much worse than the others. I had one year where 8 teams dropped out from registration to the event. And it was like, I think 3 or 4 of them dropped out within 2 weeks of the event. The last couple of years we've run a wait list, but depending on when a team drops and tells you they're not coming, even if they've paid, I mean, we've had teams that drop out that have already paid, right, and then just lose the registration money. In most cases, don't even ask for it back. They can't make it. And when it's, 2 weeks before an event, a lot of times it is hard to find, even if you have a wait list. 2 weeks before an event is hard to get a team to commit and come. We kind of subverted that a little bit by always having the question of, would you be interested in bringing a B team? And that way, if I know we're cutting it close, I may say, hey, if you're, can you plan to bring your B robot just in case? Right. If we have a no-show, or if I have somebody that last week drop, would you be able to run a B team just to fill that last slot? With 32 teams, it's not as much of a problem. It screws with the qualification schedule a little bit, but the last couple of years we haven't done backup bots on alliances. So we'll typically have, if we're one team short, it doesn't matter because it's not going to affect the 24 team elimination rounds. So those are a couple ways you can get around the last minute dropouts. But I mean, there's teams there. Like I said, there was a year where we had 8 teams drop. I think most years we probably average between around 3. And lots of times, for the most part, they're pretty early. If you stay on top of teams that haven't paid registration, especially at the beginning of the school year, you can start pinging them and say, hey, you haven't paid. And a lot of times you'll get the, oh, sorry, let me send that in. Or actually, we're not going to be able to make it.
Yep.
And if you can catch them early, then you can fill the spot.
Right. And now, having run this event 6 times, we kind of know which teams are always pay on time. Mm-hmm. And, the inverse is also true.
Yep. And actually, until this, I think the last Rumble, we had yet to have a team that had dropped out previously come back. But this year we did have a couple that had previously dropped out of the event, actually sign up to attend and actually show up this time.
And then back in I guess it was the 2016 season, championship, the ball allotment for the tower, the stronghold tower, was increased in championship, and when we came back to Rumble, our the first Chesapeake fields had been borrowed for championship, so FMS got updated to the championship update and got that increased ball count. And when we don't have official headquarters support, so when we asked very quickly, hey, can we get that ball count reduced? No, they didn't have that built in to revert back to a previous version. I think that has since been fixed, but that kind of leads into, I know this was going to be our last question, but that kind of leads into the question of what kind of rule changes are okay for off seasons. And part of that answer is it needs to be supported by FMS, because we can't make changes. So we can't make any changes to rules that aren't compatible with FMS. We just don't have the ability to adjust things. We can't change scoring. We can force scoring, so we can say everybody gets the bonus points for crossing the line in autonomous, or nobody gets the bonus points for crossing the line in autonomous. We can do things like that, and that's up to the referees to enter it or not enter it. But we can't make modifications to FMS. And the other part of that answer for what kind of rule changes are okay, we have done some pretty wild stuff with rules before. The stronghold game was pretty neat. We designed and built some wooden obstacles.
Yep.
That's still my favorite change so far we've done.
Yeah, defenses that were really neat that didn't require teams to rebuild robots, but we did have some mishaps. Some teams flipped over on those, which is kind of what we wanted to happen, right?
Yeah, or completely destroy the pins and knock them out of place because they hit backwards.
Yeah. So we've done things like that, like making custom defenses, but we've toyed with other ideas, changing penalties, making some things less strict. We talked power up year about making a weighted cube, power cube. We didn't do it, but we said, hey, why don't we just take and wrap a red cube and a blue cube in tape, gaff tape, and that would make it heavier, and everybody could get a bonus cube. But then we realized that teams might not have designed for additional weight of that object. So we had to be very careful about, that would have been really neat to have a bonus cube and you could go throw that on the scale and tip the scale in your favor and maybe win the match off of that. But we don't want teams in the off season to have to redevelop a mechanism or risk breaking something that was right on the edge of that weight limit.
Yeah, that's right. And the big thing is you don't want to favor certain meta robots by making a rule change that favors one design over another. So it is a very careful balancing act of, if we make this change, is it going to really affect some of the teams more than other teams?
Yeah, there's a little temptation to play God with the FRC game, but yeah, we just want to improve the game and not necessarily make it the way we wish the FRC game had been played.
I almost completely reorganized the 2019 field.
Yeah, right.
Decided against it, but almost did.
Yep. All right. How about parting shots?
I got nothing. I don't know.
We can do this for about 2 more hours.
Yeah, we definitely have. We probably skipped over a good 10 questions.
And if we start to get some after this video airs, if we start to get some questions from the community, maybe there's enough interest to run a second one. So definitely send your questions, and definitely consider running an off-season event. It is a lot of fun, but there's certainly things to consider before you jump in.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you get to know a lot of people. I mean, we know probably a good 75% of the volunteers now in FIRST Chesapeake, and you get to know a lot of the teams because a lot of those volunteers are coming from teams. So the question always gets asked to me of, how do I know so much about so many things going on? It's because I know so many people now that I talk to and get that information. I ask the questions. So, that's how, is because from doing this, we know so many of the people involved with everything now. I get calls from the FIRST Chesapeake director about postings on different forums.
And I think that's a good note to end it.
All right. Everybody have a good night. It's been fun.
All right. See ya.
Night, everybody.